permissible use. Table 6.4 prohibits drive-through or drive-in facilities of any use except as specifically allowed in the permissible column. And on page 3 of 4, you'll see the permissible uses column, and you'll see the prohibited column. You'll also see a footnote which goes with the coffee shop with drive-through facility under the permissible column, which the footnote 2 says a coffee shop with drive-through facility shall only be allowed within 95 feet east of City Plaza Way and within 203 feet north of Mitchell Hammock Road, as shown in Exhibit D. Exhibit D is attached to the ordinance. That is the last page of your packet. And you will find Exhibit D there, and it's the last page of the ordinance. It says Exhibit D, coffee shop with drive-through facility, and it also shows the distance as well. It matches what's in the written text of the Land Development Code. The Development Review Committee reviewed the subject amendment and recommended adoption with the following change to the LDC Section 6.4C definitions as shown in double underline in your report on page 3 of 4. And basically they added that the establishment may serve beer in addition to wine. And you'll see that. And we have incorporated that into the ordinance. At the last PZA meeting, there were several concerns that were raised by the PZA members. And I'll go through the concerns that I was able to write down. One of the concerns was if ordinance number 1625, an amendment to the Land Development Code, is approved to allow the coffee shop with drive-through at the northeast corner of Mitchell Hammock Road and City Plaza Way, what is there to prevent someone else from requesting another amendment to the Land Development Code to allow drive-through at another location within Oviedo and the Park? And then there was also a concern about what legal standing does the city have to deny the next request to amend the Land Development Code to allow drive-through either adjacent to the proposed building or somewhere else within Oviedo and the Park. Does allowing the drive-through set a precedent for others seeking the same use within Oviedo and the Park? And also, is there case law that could prevent another similar use from locating within Oviedo and the Park? We have Mr. Groot here, the city's attorney, to address some of those concerns, the legal concerns raised by the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board. We also have Mr. Morse here, who will be the developer for the project. We have Ms. Fruitt here, who she and Dr. Carrera reviewed the architectural renderings. Dr. Carrera is not here this week. She's on vacation, so we have Dr. Fruitt here as well. This concludes my presentation. It is recommended that the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board recommend adoption of Ordinance 1625. And again, I believe Mr. Morris would also like to add a language to what we have provided. He sent an email to Mr. Cobb, the city manager, today, and requested a change to the definition. And I will let him go through his request. This concludes my presentation, and we're available for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Morris? Would you state your name and address for the record, please?
Um, 2221 Lee Road, Winter Park, Florida.
Thank you.
Well, there's two requests that I'd like to make. One is as it relates to the distances. It was referred 95 feet from City Plaza Way and 203 feet from Mitchell Hammock. I'd like to ask that those measurements match our lot. Our lot actually is 96.38 feet by 203.64 feet. So I have a site plan here which I can hand out, or I can show you if you guys would like, and I have a copy of the plat as well. the proposed Starbucks and the retail building are on separate lots. So we were, I think the 95 feet was intended to match our lot, but as we've refined the site plan, and this is pretty much our final version, we would like to see if that can match. And then on the proposed language for the, technically what is called the description of the use, I can read you what I have and then hand it out. We'd like it to say coffee shop / cafe with drive-through is a particular type of restaurant that sells both hot and cold coffee, tea, and espresso drinks, sandwiches, baked goods, and small plates. May serve beer and wine by the glass on the premises or patios, but not in the drive-through lane. The basis of this is what Starbucks does. So we want to make sure that the zoning matches what they're going to do. If I've just basically elaborated on it briefly by adding the words cafe, coffee, tea, espresso drinks, and baked items. And then elaborated on wine and beer on the patios. I'm sure they're going to want to be able to sell on the patios as well. Those are the two requested changes that I have.
On a generic.
And can answer any questions that you guys have.
Are there any questions of
Coffee shops,
Mr. Morris?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Wright?
And
Yeah, that's right.
staff too? Sorry. Now that I'm looking at the site plan, I don't see the 9638 on there, but, and it's not so much important to me as that there's a jog in your property. So there's actually two westerly lines of the property, on what would be City Plaza Way. So, and what we're saying is we're giving a definitive distance one way or another. So we may need to clarify that it's 95 feet from the most westerly line of, and again, I'm looking at his site plan. There's that jog right at the intersection. There's a 6-foot jog there.
Yeah, we identified that today. We did not realize, it wasn't shown on the site plans, that additional lot. And the distance that we took, it's based on just the distance of just this one parcel. It does not include the additional parcel. So we will take another look at the distance. I don't see the distance on here. It's,
Let me,
okay, that would be perfect.
you can see that.
Okay.
This is the jog you're talking about, I'm assuming?
Yes.
So we're just going with the distance from the right-of-way or the property line on City Plaza to the property line this way. And then this way, obviously, that's a cutout of that landscape track.
Okay.
But we want to make sure that the corresponding footprint, is all included.
Yes. Okay.
Assuming that's the intent.
It is. Just this one lot.
Do you have a copy of what you were looking at with Deborah
Yeah,
for the
I
board?
think I have enough.
Thank you.
We'll share one. Yeah.
Sorry.
This hasn't been recorded yet, correct?
No.
Okay.
Ms. Pierre, instead of trying to identify the distance from Mitchell Hammock in feet, since this isn't a straight property line, could it be referred to as Lot 1? I mean, that's what's showing on here. It's identified on these drawings as Lot 1. But is it Lot 1 of this particular section, or
Madam Chair,
is that too simplistic?
if I could.
Mr.
That
Wright.
was the reason I asked him if it had been recorded yet, because this isn't a legal document yet.
Okay.
So Lot 1 doesn't exist. It's only a paper copy at this point. So I don't necessarily, because I thought the same thing. That's why I asked if it was platted yet, if it was been recorded, so.
Madam Chair, it's also better to describe the non-prohibited area by neutral terms, just distance terms, as opposed to.
Okay. Thank you. I thought that might be too simple. Are
We
there
don't want
any-
that.
Pardon?
We don't want that.
Of course not. Are there any other questions of Mr. Morse? Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Are there any questions of staff?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright?
you, the language that Mr. Morse proposed, is there any objections to that language? I mean, is there any conflicts that we would have to be considerate of?
We were directed by City Council to make sure that our definition is tight, that it only allows a restaurant such as Starbucks, which is a coffee type shop, coffee shop. If we were to open it up to cafe is any type of small restaurant. So it would actually open it up, as opposed to the way we have it today, which limits it.
The language proposed by Mr. Morse clearly broadens the type of facility that would be allowed at that particular location. I think that's pretty clear.
I'm sorry. If you want to say something, you're going to need to come back to the podium for the recording.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Morse.
Starbucks isn't considered a cafe.
And so you also have other restaurants that are considered a cafe that's not a coffee shop. So we want to limit it to a coffee shop, is the intent.
I guess my concern would be if we're limiting it to a coffee shop, but Starbucks is more than a coffee shop because they're selling.
Well, I don't want to get into a debate here, but let's parse the language. The definition of coffee shop with drive-through isn't defined as just a coffee shop. It's a particular type of restaurant. So that broadens it up right off the bat.
Okay.
Coffee shop is a particular type of restaurant. And then it describes basically what a particular type of restaurant we're talking about, which to me, seems to indicate what Starbucks does. Coffee, drinks, sandwiches, small plates, and then broadens it to serve beer and wine. So I think it's not saying it's a coffee shop, because the coffee shops don't typically sell beer and wine, and coffee shops aren't necessarily restaurants. So it's a pretty broad definition of coffee shop, I guess, is where I'm going.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Morse.
Okay.
Is there any other questions of staff? Mr. Groot, I have one. One of the biggest concerns, I guess, that PZA had at our last meeting was this setting a precedent to allow.
Okay. You want me to take your
The
four
next one.
questions? Okay.
Yes, sir.
The first one was if this amendment's approved to allow a coffee shop with drive-through at that location, what is there to prevent someone else from requesting another amendment to the LDC to allow a drive-through at another location within Oviedo on the Park? There's nothing that prohibits anybody from requesting. But unlike an application for a rezoning, this is not a rezoning. This is a text amendment. In Oviedo, we don't allow people to apply for text amendments. We only allow them to apply for rezoning of properties. That doesn't mean you can't go to an individual member of the governing board or the city manager or anybody else and say, don't you think this is a good idea, which is what has happened in this case. So you can't apply for a text amendment, but you can always try to get it sold, for lack of a better word, as a good idea, which is the process we're in now. But by right, no one can ask you to amend no one can fill out an application, pay a fee, and ask you to amend the text of the LDC. It doesn't work that way. So that's the first question. What legal standing does the city have to deny the next request? Well, once again, you can't apply, but even if you could, this is a very small area of the city, the new downtown Village Core District within Oviedo on the Park, which is unique, and you're dealing with a unique locational planning determination within a unique locational zoning district. So the ability to make tailored, precise decisions in that area, very, very high. You're going to be virtually fail-safe if you're challenged, okay? Does allowing the drive-through set a precedent for others seeking the same use within Oviedo and the park? What I just said in the last answer is kind of similar to what I would say now, is if there was another parcel that was 95 or 97 feet east of City Plaza Way, et cetera, then it might be presidential. But there's location, 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 and there's only one such located parcel that meets these planning criteria and is supported by good planning for this particular area. So once again, I don't think it sets precedent. And is there a case law that would prevent another similar use from locating within Oviedo and the park? There's case law that would clearly support denying another similar use in Oviedo and the park if someone were to try to push the envelope somehow and argue that the city was required to amend its land development code, which it clearly isn't. That's a legislative act. That's not a quasi. This is a legislative act you all are in right now. This is not a quasi-judicial proceeding. So it's very difficult to have a court order the legislature, in this case the city council, to act in a way to amend the code. So once again, I think it's be very hard pressed for someone to argue that they're entitled to a similar use. Does that answer your questions?
It does for me. What about the rest of the
Pretty much.
court?
But,
Mr. Sheridan?
Mr. Groot,
Yes, sir.
I understand City Plaza Way, Mitchell Hammock is one unique parcel
Yes, sir.
as part of that property. But what about Oviedo Boulevard and Mitchell Hammock? It's just the opposite side. It's got thoroughfare. Could it not be argued that it is virtually the same parcel, just on the opposite end of the property?
Sure, you can argue that, but this is a legislative
It's like-
act. You have
Okay.
lots of discretion when it comes to that, and there are unique planning issues as to this parcel that you could distinguish any other parcel, no matter how compelling it might be for a property owner.
Okay. And then one more, if I may. Back to the definition, sells coffee, drinks, sandwiches, small plates, serve beer and wine. In my mind, we're talking about semantics. I mean, that's any small restaurant. That's anything that can go in there with small plates, beer and wine. Going forward, if Starbucks decides that they can't exist in that spot, just about anything can fit in that definition. That
I can't argue with you on that, because when you talk about words, I mean, clearly this is more restrictive than what was proposed, and I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings, but this is more restrictive than what was proposed. Could an argument be made that this is broader in implication than a pure Starbucks? Well, you could argue that. I don't think that's what was intended, and I think it's very clear. The legislative record is pretty clear throughout this process what's intended. But your point's well taken in that words, if there's any ambiguity, can cause problems. Is there ambiguity in these two sentences or one sentence? Probably some, but there's ambiguity in everything you write. I wish I could say except when I write, but that's not true. I mean, so.
understood.
Anyone else?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Under the definition, I know the intent was also to serve this food on the patio as well, and using the term "in the premises" somewhat excludes the patio. Can we change that to "on the premises"?
That makes a lot of sense.
Mr. Lopez?
When we're saying premise, are we saying just on that parcel or anywhere on that property? downtown.
Any place in that 200 by 93 feet.
Just to clarify, because we don't want people walking down the street with the glass.
Well, they can't do that anyway. I know it's easy to say you can't. Let me put it a different way. Their alcoholic beverage license will prohibit them from allowing people from leaving their premises with a glass. But
Madam Chair,
Yes.
another question for Mr. Groot. With regards to the language in terms of, I think, maybe a little bit more restrictive with the uses that are allowed on premise, the small sandwiches, small plates, whatever was proposed, if that is excluded and this continues forward just as coffee shop, again, this is a president's question with what does that set forward in developments coming forward in the future that we can't foresee at this time if those developments say, well, this was defined as a coffee shop, yet they technically did have small plates. They did have cold or hot items. They did have teas. They did have this, that, or the other. And we're proposing the same thing, but you guys aren't classifying us as a coffee shop.
in Oviedo on the Park in this particular?
Correct.
But the use would be allowed without a drive-through somewhere. But it's an authorized use without a drive-through. The drive-through is only allowed at a certain location. So,
Okay.
Was the question, could you have a coffee shop somewhere else?
Look, unfortunately, my example I'm going to go to is another coffee shop, but I'm throwing this out there. Let's say Tim Hortons comes down, and they say, Oviedo on the Park looks like a great spot. Let's go in there. And Starbucks has since moved out, and let's say they weren't a coffee shop; they were just a donut shop.
Okay.
They have a drive-through, but they use the argument that Starbucks did have smaller hot plates and smaller cold plates, things like that in the past. And that's what we accepted as our definition of a coffee shop.
They can technically have a Dunkin' Donuts that calls himself a coffee shop because they do sell coffee.
That's what I was thinking. That's exactly the example I was thinking. Could Starbucks move out and Dunkin' Donuts move in? Yes, probably. Breakfast sandwiches? Sandwiches. Small plates? Small plates. Coffee? Yes. Type of restaurant? Yes. So it kind of fills in all the compartments, doesn't it?
Okay. I just wanted to make sure
No,
that
you're right. No.
as we go through this discussion, we all understand what our ultimate vote is essentially going to define a coffee shop as.
Now, I've never seen a Dunkin' Donuts that sells beer and wine. That might be a good idea in a college town, I suppose. No.
Are there any other questions of staff?
I just have one,
Mr. Wright?
Madam Chair. Mr. Groot, just to be, it's probably arguing semantics at this point, but I think you made a statement earlier about our code requires that they can't leave the premises.
Well, state law does, right?
State law, understood. What the definition is, the premises, the interior of the building, their seating area, is it their entire lot, the parking area?
Depends upon what the state license, when you get an alcoholic beverage license, there is a premises described, and you're not allowed to when you sell by the drink, you're not allowed to allow your customers to leave the premises. You're supposed to do something about it. Now, I don't know what all the ramifications are if you don't do that, but I understand that they do send beverage agents out to check to see if you're doing that on a routine basis. So. But the premises are the described licensed premises on which alcohol can be served.
Okay. I want to make sure it wasn't consistent with kind of what we're trying to define as the parcel size.
Well, our premise and the state's licensed premise could be two different things. theirs will be, well, they will be. Their state license premise will be smaller than this premise, because we've already said you can't do it in drive-through, so. But that's part of our premise.
My reason for asking is because of looking at the site plan that was provided. Obviously, there's within that 203 by 96 approximate feet, there's a tract that's being dedicated to the city that's inclusive now in that overall definition. At least according to the site plan, there's a future tract, 0.7 acres to be dedicated. So by giving a definition of X amount of feet east of City View and north of Mitchell Hammock would include that tract. So just want to make sure that, if we have to, again, be specific on dimensions, we may need to exclude.
They won't have an alcoholic beverage license over city-owned property.
Understood. But what I'm saying, if our definition of premises, it's the 96 by 203, that basically means somebody can just come out and walk out of that tract and sit and drink beer, so. But I understand what you're saying, is that alcohol, they may define it in a much smaller.
Oh, yeah,
footprint.
it's whatever's licensed.
But on my other side of it is that we're defining the drive-through specifically X amount of feet from City View, north of, which is going to include a future tract of the city of Oviedo. So unless you guys are planning on putting a coffee shop and a drive-through, we may want to exclude that tract.
Yes. So we will do that.
No questions, thank you.
Pardon?
I don't have any more questions.
Okay, anyone else?
You could even put on non-governmentally
I have
owned
one.
properties.
I'm looking at the attachment 1 to the staff report, the concept elevation A6.3, where it shows the screen wall that would be along the drive-through that's been talked about. When you look at these renderings and see this person drawn in there and see how the height of that proposed wall along the drive-through and see the car sitting there on the south elevation, it's obvious that if it's like a large SUV, it's still going to be visible above that screening wall. Is there some place we can put in, including with what we're doing tonight, that to state that if there's a coffee shop with a drive-through, that the drive-through must be hidden from the street, such that that screening wall is taller, so that an SUV would be hidden? I mean, one of the things, I guess one of the problems I've had with this is from the beginning of Oviedo on the part back in, 2000, 2001, it was always no drive-throughs. And in reviewing all of this, it looks like staff has put in a great effort to hide it as much as possible with the screening wall. And what I'm wondering is can we put language in what we're doing tonight that would require it to be, we say that the drive-through has to be hidden behind the wall.
Proposed language, I don't know what it would be. That's what I'm trying to think.
We're going to allow Gino to address the look of the wall, but you can add language in there that would screen the wall, so screen the drive-through. But we're going to let Gino talk about the wall itself.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Fruitt.
Jenna Fruitt, Development Review Division. We had various interactions with applicants to get to that screening. One of the things that we suggested to, and it appears here, is to have landscape behind the wall, which here is not depicted very high. I think that what we could suggest, in our opinion, considering that this is a street, is to make the landscape higher, to to screen the drive-through. The reason why I would not, from the standpoint of architecture, recommend a higher wall, it's because it would take out it would be a blank wall, high, very close to the street. Whereas this height, it's high enough. You can put some type of vegetation even on the wall, on pots that could also be removable. And it gives you more, to a certain extent, some type of visibility, not of the drive-through, but of the building. So, on my view, I'd say that if we want to attain a more screening that would not, we would not see the cars, I would say that many types of vegetation, they can be very effective on that. And still, it would not be a construction or a wall. I'd like the applicant, if you have, because this is conceptual, we don't have the plans yet. I mean, the architectural plans. If you have the height of this wall, would you know? Just to provide that information to the board.
Can you come to the microphone, please?
I apologize. I don't have the exact height on me of the wall. I can tell you that I don't believe this person is to scale. I would venture to say, and bet $1 on it, that he's larger than average.
Depends on who you ask.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. What was your name? What was your name?
Matt.
Matt. This is Matt. The drive-through lane, as you can see, will be a little lower, so I think the cars will sit to address your concern. Lower than the wall, I think line of sight. You won't see it. I think the vegetation is going to grow. We can have it grow as high or trim it as where we want. I think to Jenna's point, the proportion of what we've designed, I mean, this is fairly close to what our final rendering. I mean, we've tweaked it since this, but with the trellises and the murals behind it, I think it'll, in our opinion, it's going to start to get a little out of balance. We start to raise the wall, then try to put a trellis on it, and then connect it to the building.
So I'm assuming the overhang there is open. It's not a solid roof over the drive-up, so that vegetation can grow?
Oh, yeah, it's connected to the building, but with beams, certainly light and sunshine. Yeah, absolutely. We don't want the tunnel on the drive-through portion, because as much as I understand everybody's concerned about a drive-through, the customers and citizens of Oviedo are going to be going through there. I don't think they're going to want to go through a tunnel.
Yeah, I don't want it to be a tunnel either. I just want the drive-through hidden.
No, I understand.
Whether it's a wall, it's a trellis.
Quick question.
Mr.
You
Lopez?
just said something that caught my attention. The driveway is going to dip down.
No,
I mean, it comes down. I mean, it comes down a little bit.
No, I'm just talking about the curbing. Your street is always, there's always curbing.
Yeah, I know, but it looked from what thought you said you were coming down a little lower on the drive-through.
No,
Maybe I missed
I'm
the
sorry. I
drive-through.
meant just the drive itself. There's curbing, so
Okay.
the
So
wall, then you've
Okay.
got to take away curbing, so it's the wall plus for the car system.
Okay. Because the way you mentioned it was like you had dropped the driveway down, and I was going to be concerned about more water. Okay.
Madam Chair, I do have a question
Mr. Young.
following up on that. And this is just a discussion point to provide the language. Does staff not think it would be beneficial? I'm looking at the south elevation on the cross-section there where you show the landscaping internal to the drive-through. Basically swapping those, putting the landscaping on the external side of the wall, which would be along City Plaza Way, potentially requiring the wall height to at least be 6 feet with open cut-throughs in the wall. You know, it doesn't have to be a solid wall necessarily, but it could have open breaks in it, so to speak, with landscaping on the public right-of-way side that could grow to a certain height or mature to a certain height within a certain time period. That would maybe better satisfy at least my opinion of disguising the drive-through instead of a brick wall on the outside with landscaping internal to the drive-through.
Jenna, do you have I believe staff has looked at that idea.
Okay.
One of the reasons for having the wall and connecting it to the building is to have some type of, for the wall to become part of the building. The setbacks in the Oviedo Park, they are 0, to give the idea of like a wall when you are in a street of a more urban feeling, I'd say. So that's why we worked with the brick, having texture, having a wall, and putting the landscape behind it. In this case, I'm proposing higher, like you said, so it could be one way. But, you know, that's up to the applicant and the city to rediscuss that. I don't know how the applicant feels about that. Putting the landscape on this side of the...
We're trying to make everybody happy. And there's a lot of chiefs in the kitchen here. I think that, I mean, with all due respect, I can redesign it 6 ways to Sunday based on every board that I go in front of. I've also got the master developer, which I know you guys are familiar with, and what his idea of the look is, what the city's idea of the look is. I think the point of it being a streetscape, the buildings, the whole theme that's been presented to us is buildings on the street. And that's kind of what we've tried to match. We also have a sidewalk out there. There's benches, and we're envisioning pedestrians coming and utilizing the benches and walking up through the rest of the park as it's developed. So, I mean, we obviously like it the way it is. We're obviously open to suggestions. I'll work with everybody I can. At this point, we're hoping to continue on in the direction that we have. The landscaping on the inside is to kind of give, on that side of the drive-through, freshen it up. So when the vehicles and everybody's in there, you're not in a stale, as I put it earlier, tunnel-type atmosphere. It's a living wall. It's, you know, warmer. On the outside, a little more avenue, you know, streetscape oriented.
One question that I have while you're at the podium, in looking at the site plan that you handed out to us tonight, can you tell me what the distance is between the outside of that wall that we're talking about, where the benches and I've heard fountains are? How far from that, where people would be sitting on the bench, to your property line along City Plaza Way?
You're talking about the outside of the wall.
On the outside of the wall.
I think we have about a 5-foot landscape area between the wall and the sidewalk. And the benches would be in that landscape area, cut in on a concrete pad or pavers or what have you.
So I'm wondering,
my point is there will be a bed of landscaping between the wall and the sidewalk. It's not going to just be a wall on top of a sidewalk.
The, the thought, where I'm going with this is, are we talking about a 4-foot section, and how does somebody get to those benches? And is it really practical to think somebody's actually going to sit them if it's a very narrow spot?
Well, the city has a sidewalk there already. Benches aren't going to be imposing into the right of way.
So from, say here,
Bench, there'll be landscaping, and a bench, intermittent. Along the front, and then you'll have all this area. There's planters here, existing.
this is open from your wall out to the city sidewalk.
Yeah, it's clear from parking to the.
This is the wall.
Here, that's where the bench is. But this is open all the way out. Okay, that answers my question. So now I guess I'm back to the question about being able to hide the cars in the drive-through. So if we have wording such that whether it's a wall or it's landscaping behind the wall or whatever, that it's tall enough to hide the typical SUV, where would that language be the most appropriate to be inserted?
If you look in your ordinance on page 4 of the ordinance, Mr. Groot has put together some language for, it would be 12, where it talks about the coffee shop with drive-through as a particular type of restaurant. At the, let's see, it'll say, is a particular type of restaurant subject to locational requirements that sells coffee, drinks, sandwiches, and small plates, and may serve beer and wine by the glass on, it's now going to say on, the premises, but not in the drive-through. And Mr. Groot's additional language would be, which you all can massage, but it would say, which drive-through shall be screened from pedestrian traffic by landscaping associated with any wall constructed insofar as practicable. Or you can put a height, or however you want to massage it, you can do that. But that's where the language would go.
Can you read that one more time? That
Okay,
additional
so at
language?
the end where it says the drive-through, which drive-through shall be screened from pedestrian traffic by landscaping associated with any wall constructed insofar as practicable. Or you can say at a height to cover, I don't know what height.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright?
this was a question for staff. Pretty much from history of being here, we kind of mandated a 6-foot height maximum. We don't really allow any walls or fences or enclosures or screening to really go beyond the 6-foot height. So, I don't think we want to go any higher than that dimension anyways, in general. So anything higher would be, like I said, basically just a big blank wall right on Oviedo, or on Center City Plaza Way. But I think that's correct. I mean, we pretty much stick at 6 foot, or less in this case, but we max out at 6 foot.
That is correct for most areas. There is an exemption for recreational areas, which can exceed that, but typically it's just 6 feet for commercial areas.
And to follow up on that, the language that that was just written or read to us, I'm concerned that, again, we're getting maybe a little too specific, and don't want to put anything in there that, basically it says any landscape associated, or by landscaping associated with any wall. Again, to me, any wall can be defined as PVC fence, could be defined as a board fence, could be defined, I don't want this to come back and say, well, we're not putting any wall, we're just not going to go with landscaping. I think we're being pretty specific in the way the site plan was presented to us in the architectural rendering. How detailed, again, this is not a site development, this is not for us a recommendation to approve or a deviation. This is part of our land development code. We're getting very wordy in a sense in this one specific thing. And I'm concerned that we're just adding just multiple layers of language on something. So I realize, as you pointed out, this is not textbook for us. This is we don't have an application process for this. This was somebody made a question, somebody proceeded to push this through so that we could make this change. We're really drilling down into this. If we're gonna start specifying heights of landscaping in our land development code for a specific 200 by 98-foot parcel in our land development code.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Pollack?
It seems like, we're focusing on concealing the vehicle inside the right up next to the building, but I mean, in the mornings and evenings, or actually in the mornings, if you go by a Starbucks, I mean, traffic's going to be backed up around Mike Roberto Way and all the way through. There's going to be plenty of cars lined up all along this whole drive-through lane, and we're going to cover them here, but everything's going to be open there. I mean, I don't think that there's, you're going to see cars one way or another, going through there. So, I mean, I think their proposal to have that, kind of half wall there and have some plants behind it, those will grow up a little bit. I don't think that's, that bad. I mean, otherwise we're going to want to screen the whole driveway, which. So.
Mr. Lopez?
We're breaking Robert Rules of Order, talking about ourselves.
These are questions from staff we're discussing. Let's get questions
Chair?
with staff. Yes.
I'd like to follow up again with a staff question. Again, what we're talking about here is specific to this site. When this thing goes through site development approval, will there not be an opportunity for staff or if there's requirements that somebody's going to be able to look at this and kind of put that caveat of landscaping requirements?
The site plan is currently under review. We have some landscape requirements for vehicular use areas for single uses in the downtown, and it requires to have some type of screening and landscaping. So that could be applied to that because that's a vehicular use area, the drive-through itself. I can check now in the Land Development Code what specifically is the requirement, if you give me a little bit of time.
Thank you. To me, that's just a better use
But
of
yeah,
our.
there are
our
some
code versus
requirements.
trying to define something in the land development code for this specifically. So.
But we don't have like maximum heights for screening. There are requirements, but we don't have that. But I can check what exactly it could be.
Thank you. My concern is that the drive-through is not compatible with Oviedo and the park, and
Ma'am.
trying to screen it and disguise it is, we're being very specific in the language that we're looking at tonight with putting a coffee shop with a drive-through in that particular location.
Madam Chair,
Yes. Mr. Sheridan.
expanding on that a little bit. Again, we've all sat up here a long time. Some of us on the original committees looking at this. My question, and it really just came up a couple minutes ago, if there's going to be benches on the opposite side of the wall, how are the patrons going to get there?
That was my question that I was asking earlier when we were looking at the,
We were supposed to be a non-drive-through community, a walk-through community, and now we're going to ask patrons to walk through the drive-through to get to the benches that they're going to sit on? That makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright?
I will tell you from my opinion, looking at this, I didn't envision that this was for the patrons. This was just an amenity to the city to screen the wall, so that when people were walking down the street, right now, they either sit on the planters or they just continue to walking, that this is an amenity that's being provided to us to help kind of buffer that wall with, it's really just, it's cover up, and it's to the city so people walking by can say, I didn't see this for the patrons. That was my opinion, so, when I looked at it. The patrons they have their outside, they have their inside right there, that the idea was not for them to walk across the drive-through and go outside the wall just to sit on the street. It was basically for the residents' use.
I will let Dr. Fruitt answer that, but there should be pedestrian walkways that should take them from the sidewalk into the restaurant for safety purposes. So I'll let Dr. Fruitt answer that question as well.
I'd like first to address your question, Madam Chair. It's about the requirements for landscaping. We have a requirement, minimum shrub standards. A shrub used to meet a perimeter screening or buffer yard requirement, which it is required in that site, shall be an upright type growing plant with a minimum planted height of 2 feet and a spread of 24 inches. Shrubs shall be planted at a maximum spacing of 3 feet on center to create a hedgerow, and they shall be maintained at a minimum installation height or greater. So we have a minimum, but we don't have a maximum for the shrub to be. So that would be the requirement that we would have in the Land Development Code that we are applying to the review currently.
So 2 feet's the minimum.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Can you remind me the other question?
It was Mr. Sheridan's question.
I was asking how the patrons are going to get from the restaurant to the opposite side of the wall where the benches are going to be.
There is one, there is not exactly from the wall, but from the patio that it's being proposed on the other side of the drive-through, that it would be part of the patio of the Starbucks. So this would have some type of pedestrian crossing. Now, the benches along the wall, they can be either, so people, if they are sitting here, they want to go into the store, they would have to use that pedestrian crossing to get into the store.
But either way, they're going to have to walk across
Yes.
the traffic of the
Yeah.
drive-through.
Yes, it
Okay.
is. It would. Now, the benches are not only for, despite being on the property, inside the private property, the idea is to offer another semi-public amenity that people that are just there, they can sit, because no one knows where the property line is. And the assumption is that the property line would be on the wall, under the wall, and not
Madam Chair,
behind
Mr.
it.
Sheridan?
with all due respect, the idea was that people were going to be able to walk through this whole community without having to worry about traffic. That was the vision from the day this project started. And now we're asking whoever it is, if it's people parking on City Plaza Way that want to go to Starbucks, to walk across traffic in a drive-through.
Yes,
So
that's
we're
one way
going
to get
against our
there.
vision.
That's one way to get there, but you have another access from Mitchell Hammock directly, or from Mike Roberto Way directly into the store. So that would be a third way to get into there. But yes, they cross the the drive-through.
Are there any other questions of staff? Okay, this is a public hearing item, so I'll open it up for public hearing. Anyone here wishing to speak to the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public hearing. What's the board's pleasure?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance number 1625 with the one correction that the 95 by 203 foot dimensions spelled out in the order is revised to reflect the actual dimensions of the property.
I'm sorry, before there's a second, there was another correction to paragraph 12, changing it from in the premises to on the premises that was discussed. Are you including that as
Yeah,
well?
I'll go ahead. I'm sorry. That language, yes, that would be fine.
Okay, thank you.
Madam
Now, is there-
Chair, I'm sorry.
Ms. Pierre?
Does the motion also include where you have, if you look at page 10 in your ordinance, the footnote number 2, where it says a coffee shop, are you all there? Okay, it says a coffee shop with drive-through facilities shall only be allowed within, we can change it to 96 feet, because he's showing 96 feet. East of City Plaza Way and within 203 feet north of Mitchell Hammock Road. And we can also put outside of the city-owned parcel as shown in Exhibit D.
You can, yes, that would be fine. Just, you can be as specific as you want. As I mentioned earlier, if we just say the east of 95 feet or 96.38 feet east of City Plaza Way has physically two locations. It has it from the westerly line, and it has it from the 6-foot offset. So I would make staff's discretion to correct the language. That's kind of was being generic. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's the motion. In a second?
Second.
Mr. Lopez, thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay. We'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Nay. You and me, that's 2 nays. Motion carries. Okay, this item will be considered by City Council August 3rd and August 15th at 6:30 in these chambers. Good luck to you, sir. Okay. The next item on our agenda is ordinance 1626, amendments to the LDC, Articles 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. Who's up? Deborah?
It'll be me.
Okay.
Okay, you have a PowerPoint presentation before you. It says time for review. Clean all that stuff off. You're welcome. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about the Land Development Code process amendments, and I'd like to thank the PZA for allowing staff to come and talk about some of the changes that are taking place, proposed to take place with the Land Development Code. And it's been a collaborative effort between a number of different city departments, including the city attorney. We had one work session with the PZA back in 2013 on the process amendments, and we're finally moving forward to public hearing to discuss the amendments. So tonight we're going to talk about the existing process, the proposed process, the DRC's recommendation, next steps, and then we'll get into discussion. So the existing process is for approval authority is staff can approve compliant projects up to 10% deviation. The DRC can approve between 11% and 20% deviations for site development orders and building permits. Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board can approve between 21% and 30% deviations for building permits. City Council approves 21% and up for site development orders and 31% and up for building permits. Deviations today greater than 30% requires a development agreement. The development agreement is required to be submitted to the DRC, Development Review Committee, Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board, and then to City Council. Architectural plans today can be submitted either during site plan review or building permit review today. Today, there are architectural standards for mixed-use development in the downtown, office development, and commercial development. There are no architectural standards for multifamily development and townhome development. We've heard concerns from developers during our pre-application meetings, and they are looking for a streamlined process. The Land Development Code does not differentiate between small and large projects. There's no streamlined process for small developments. And we've heard this during our pre-application meetings. Also, we heard it during the Oviedo Development Review Evaluation Workshop that was done by our consultants, Littlejohn Engineering. So, as a result, the staff made changes to the Land Development Code. The revisions include, in terms of approval authority, the DRC, which is the Development Review Committee, has been eliminated. The members are still involved with the review. It's a way to streamline the review of projects. The Land Use Administrator can now approve compliant projects in up to 20% deviation for site development orders and building permits, which the Land Use Administrator's previous role was up to 10%. So the Land Use Administrator has assumed the DRC's responsibilities. The Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board, the name has changed to the Local Planning Agency, which is consistent with Florida Statute 163. The approval authority for building permits now would be 21% and up. So there's no need for a development agreement any longer for building permits or even site development orders that require a deviation over 30%. So now the LPA today, or PZA today, will now be able to approve all building permits that require a deviation between 21% and up. So you all are the approval authority on that. City Council maintained its 21% and up for approval authority for site development orders. We also created a hearing officer role. The hearing officer will review and act or make recommendations on any application or interpretation referred by the land use administrator or city council. They will also review and act on appeals of any final order or decision of the land use administrator regarding the minimum requirements of the land development code. And again, we eliminated the need for a development agreement for deviations over 30%, which will lead to a quicker process for those deviations. And with those deviations, because with the site development orders, typically whenever there is a site development order that requires a deviation over 30%, requires a development agreement, the development agreement goes before DRC, PZA, and City Council for site development orders. Since we have eliminated the need for a development agreement, deviations over 30% will no longer come to the PZA. It'll go from staff to City Council, and we'll go over that process again when we look at the table. We also created a redevelopment site development order, which allows the land use administrator to approve site development orders that are compliant and up to 20%, and any architectural plans associated with it. A redevelopment site development order has to be property less than 5,000 square feet, no more than 500 average daily trips, and it has to be non-residential adjacent, cannot be non-residential adjacent to a single-family zoning district. And the building cannot be part of a larger development, so it can't be a part of a planned unit development or any larger development like a master land use plan. We also created new processes for the pre-annexation agreement application. We have it today, but there's no formal process, so we established a formal process for it. We created what's called a lot aggregation and reconfiguration application, and it's where you combine two or more contiguous non-platted lots into one parcel, and it cannot be a lot that's illegally created. It has to be the same ownership, and it must conform to the minimum lot size, width, and setbacks of the applicable zoning district. We created a new architectural design order application, and it applies to any property regardless to what zoning district it is for the following uses. And it's for your mixed-use development, multifamily development, townhome development, office development, and commercial development. And we'll talk about the process in the next slide. So today, as I mentioned, your architectural plans can be submitted either at your building permit or during your site plan stage. And during our work sessions, the City Council at one point wanted the architectural plans to be submitted prior to site plan approval. And it caused, we thought, some issues with developers because when they're at their site plan stage, they don't necessarily know who's going to purchase the property. Sometimes they do know, other times they don't know. So to have an architectural plan approved by City Council at that point, we know they're going to come back with changes. And any changes made to the architectural plan has to go back before City Council. So after our last work session with City Council decided that they want to see it, but they can wait until they get to the building permit stage. So we were able to keep the option. You can still submit it during your site plan or during your building permit stage, but you have to submit it before you can get your building permit. So the building permit, no building permit until City Council approves your architectural design order, and it requires architectural plans, elevations, details, and color renderings showing all sides, and sample boards showing sample materials and colors. We also created a new process for the vested rights application. We established a formal process. Previously, an applicant can submit legal arguments requesting that typically it's involving like a planned unit development where the development agreement has expired, and there's still some land left, and they want to be able to build on that land. So what they do today is they will submit arguments, legal arguments, as to why their property should be vested. We send it to the city attorney. City attorney provides his opinion on whether or not they've submitted sufficient information, and it's approved by the city manager. So we're changing that process. They will still have to submit their arguments, their legal arguments. The city attorney will still review it, but then it's approved by city council. So that's a new process. We have created an outdoor sales event application. We've kind of split the special event application into two. We have a special event application and then an outdoor sales event application. So the outdoor sales event application is going to be for activities such as firework, tent sales, Christmas tree sales, flower sales, etc. And it cannot be located in a permanent structure. And it's for sites where the activity was not approved in a site development order for such sales. And we also have in our code where we can now revoke or deny an application based on department comments or code enforcement actions. The same thing goes for the special event applications. The special event applications are now for major events, city and nonprofit events. And it's a city event or events organized or sponsored by the city, places of worship, public and private schools. The event has to be wholly contained on the subject property owned by the property owner. The event has to be organized by the property owner. No city services can be required or requested. It allows the city to revoke or deny an application. So we're going to go to our table now. And this is going to be your attachment 1.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pollak?
I had a question on that special events application. You said no city services required. So if there are city services like police required for it, then you don't use that application process?
They're not exempt.
They're not exempt?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so if you look at your attachment 1, we're going to go through the applications and the process. Okay. So you have 4 columns there. The first column is going to be the application types. The second column is going to be today's process. The third column is going to be the process as a result of the work session that took place on February 10th, 2014. And the fourth column is going to be the proposed process as recommended by staff. So if you go down, it's not numbered, but the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, up to annexation petition, that process, the process for those applications above annexation petitions have not changed. The comprehensive plan amendment, that's statutory that the LPA or PZA reviews comprehensive plan amendments. LDC, those things have not changed. So the new process is going to be the pre-annexation agreement, which we discussed. And today's process is that the land use administrator reviews it, the DRC review it, that's existing process, and the city council acts on it. The proposed process in orange, the fourth column, we eliminated the DRC, so it's going to be the land use administrator and then city council action. The PUD with the non-statutory development agreement, there's no change with that one. The non-statutory development agreement, there's no change with that one either. The site development order private project compliant, you'll see under the proposed process, that during that work session, City Council, the footnote 1, where it says the architectural design order to be approved by City Council prior to the issuance of the site development order, that was during that work session. So if you go over to the proposed process, after we had our work session, it's now 3, which says the architectural design order must be approved prior to the issuance of a building permit. And it's going to be the same thing with the site development order up to 10%. It's going to be the same. Where you see the site development order 11% to 20%, under today's process, it's the review by the land use administrator, approval by the DRC. Under the green proposed process, it was the review by the land use administrator, and then you had the hearing officer who was going to act on the 11 to 20%. And as a result of cost associated with budget, we realized it was costly. So we deleted the hearing officer role and gave that responsibility to staff after we discussed it with City Council. So you'll see that over in the orange column, the fourth one, you'll see staff is approving 11 to 20%. However, the architectural plans are still required to be approved by City Council, and that's for all site development orders that are, as we went over, the multifamily, the townhomes, commercial office. All of those are required to be reviewed by City Council. The next change will be the site development order 21% and up. And the change here is just the removal of the hearing officer, and then we're replacing that level of approval authority to staff. There's no change with the next 2 items. And then you go to the site development orders, the city project, 11 to 20%, and it's going to be staff level as well. 21% and up is going to be a recommendation by the land use administrator and approval by City Council. There's no change to the final plat, no change to the non-statutory subdivision. There is a new application, which is the lot aggregation reconfiguration, and the process is going to be staff level approval, which is similar to it's the reverse of the lot split. So the lot split is approved by the staff, it's approved by the land use administrator, and the lot aggregation will also be approved by the land use administrator. The site development order, new downtown zoning districts compliant. The architectural plans will be required to be approved by City Council prior to the building permit. That's the change there. And also, we removed the hearing officer role in those items as well. The next change is going to come about on the next page. Where you see the building permits, and it's going to be the building permits, 11% to 20% is going to be staff, and then the building permits, 21% and up is going to be LPA, and the title of the proposed process is LPA as opposed to PZA. And then you also have the architectural design order, which is the new application. So you'll have a recommendation by the land use administrator, and that's going to be in orange, and then approval by the City Council.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pollack?
if you look at the building permits for city projects, deviation 11% and up, and you follow that across, it doesn't have anything for the proposed process.
Yes, and when you go down to the orange area, if you go further down, that was, if you look
Okay.
at the green, that was the proposed
This one
process
wasn't
during the
strict.
city council work session. So the new process is going to be in the orange area. So if you go across, that's going to be the proposed process.
Okay, okay.
And then if you look at the last page, the redevelopment site development order is a new application, and the process will be the land use administrator approval up to 20%, 21% and up will be the city council. And then vested rights is also a new application, which we talked about. And today, it's the land use administrator who issues them. Proposed process will be the land use administrator making a recommendation and city council approving them. I also want to go over with you the DRC's recommendation. And you have a packet in front of you, this packet. Do you have one, Lauren? And I put highlights on the, yellow highlights on the pages. On page 3 of the ordinance, if you look at C1, section 1.6C, it's highlighted. And the DRC wanted to make sure, I had in there that the land use administrator shall establish an application fee, and it's changed to city council because only city council can adopt a resolution and come up with a fee. The land use administrator will make a recommendation on it, though. And then on page 4, under powers and duties of the land use administrator, at our work session with City Council, because we were getting the additional authority of 11 to 20%, the City Council wanted to make sure that the land use administrator signed off on those permits and orders. We wanted to make sure that the city manager or the development services director signed off on it. So we put language under B, which is powers and duties, and it says the land use administrator shall execute the development orders / permits associated with the following applications. And those are all the ones that the land use administrator can approve. So we put that language there. The DRC also recommended on page 6, section 2.2, that we create a new section for the city attorney. The city attorney's language was already there, but it was under the land use administrator. So we created a new section 2.2, titled it City Attorney.
I'm sorry, Deborah, can I interrupt you a minute? Mm-hmm. Can we go back to page 4? 2.1B, the powers and duties of the land use administrator,
Yes.
where it says the land use administrator shall review and act upon or refer to city staff or hearing officer or city council. And then it goes on to talk about building permits. Should LPA not be included in there? Shall refer, instead of where you've taken out DRC, should that not say LPA, since LPA is the approving authority on building permits with deviations over 20%?
The LPA, the LPA is the approving authority for building permits over 20%.
So here where it says the land use administrator shall refer to city staff, a hearing officer, or the city council, should that also say LPA there?
I don't think the land use administrator refers anything to you. There's certain things that go to you automatically.
Okay. That was the only question I had there, is whether or not it needed to be included there.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright?
I'm just looking on page 3 of the amendment for the attachment 1 in the orange.
Page
Fourth
3.
line down, page 3 of attachment 1. The building permit / other DP, private project development, 20, or deviation 21% and up. I mean, that's a situation where the land use administrator recommends approval, and then we're the final approval. Automatically. Yeah. So I guess that's what isn't that what you're questioning, why that, the language doesn't say that in powers and duties? So
Yes.
there is instances where he is the recommending authority, and we're the approval in that way.
He's just not referring it to you.
None of this that's in here is over 21%. No. Yeah. The language under the land use administrator are all the things that the land use administrator can approve. So the land use administrator is the approving authority on each one of those items. But if there's an instance where it's too controversial, or it's the land use administrator can send it to the hearing officer or city council, or the land use administrator can say this is something that can be considered by staff.
Okay, that clears it up for me.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Pollack?
Ms. Pierre, can you go back to page 3 of this? I think you're missing the word fee in section 1.6 C. On that, right at the end of the sentence, it says, shall establish an application. It should say fee by resolution, right?
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so then the next change is going to be on page 7. They added under powers and duties, this is of the hearing officer. The question was at the DRC, when in certain instances in the downtown, the land use administrator is the city council. So the question was, what happens when the city council is serving as the land use administrator? Can someone appeal to the hearing officer? And the only appeals of city council would be to the courts. So the DRC wanted to just make sure that it was clear in the land development code that no one can appeal city council's decision. So under B, it says review and act upon appeals of any final order or decision of the land use administrator regarding a minimum requirement of this LDC, except when the city council is acting as the land use administrator. And then if you go down that page 2.4, you'll see the area where it talks about the PZA and the changes, the local planning agency. Under 2.4B, the DRC recommended that the terms of the PZA members or LPA members be a 2-year term. So for 1, it will say the LPA shall have no less than 5 members appointed by the city council for 2-year terms. And then the same language would be about the next sentence after the sentence that's stricken through. It would say the members shall serve 2-year terms. That was another change brought about at the DRC meeting. The next change comes about on page 10.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Pollack?
What was, Ms. Pierre, what was the change in the terms? Why would they go from 3 to 2? Was there a reason behind that?
I don't remember there being a reason or a discussion on it. it was just raised, and the DRC all agreed to putting that term limit there.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Young?
To piggyback that question, for lack of a better term, was the same discussion had for the members of the board from 7 to 5? Was it just a recommendation and there was no discussion, or how did that come about as well?
That came about during, I believe that was back in 2013, during all the work sessions, is where that language came about. I cannot exactly remember how that language came about, but it was during the work sessions. We had a series of work sessions with the City Council. We also had a work session with this board, but I believe it came about as a result of work sessions with the City Council, but it was a while ago. It was back in 2013.
Mr. Wright, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I just, there's two highlighted lines in that paragraph, subparagraph 1, where it says the LPA shall consist of, have no less than 5 members appointed to the city council for 2, I'm assuming that means just 2-year terms. It's not referring to 2 2-year terms, right? It's just the abbreviation.
Just the
for them.
2-year terms, yeah.
Which I guess I didn't understand why that next sentence was even necessary, that we're going to serve 2-year terms if we're being appointed for 2-year terms. It seems kind of redundant.
Yeah, you don't need both sentences, yes.
And I guess my next question is, which 2 members of the board they don't like that they're going to get rid of?
There's no
Don't
list.
need an answer. Thank you.
I have no answer for that.
It doesn't say they had to drop it down to 7.
Ms. Pierre, can you tell us if there's been discussion by council as to how they will make that determination?
There has not been discussion by council.
Okay.
Okay, so your next change is going to come about on page 10. DRC recommended on number 12 that we put in under, next to site development orders, that we put in parentheses, other development projects, and it's consistent with what's provided on page 14, where it says site development orders. There's one that says city development projects, and the other one says other development projects. So on page 10, you'll see in yellow it says other development projects, and then number 14 says city projects. We also added language in number 14, which says excluding the new downtown village core district and new downtown district. We added language on page 11, 2.6 appeals, where it says except when city council is acting as land use administrator. And the next change is on page 37.
Ms. Pierre, before you go there, can we look at page 12? And I'm looking at what's now the new C. LPA is in that last line. That's saying an action appealed from. Never mind, I was thinking it said appealed to, so we can skip that one.
Okay. So on page 37, you will see a footnote on the bottom where we have in Article 2, under City Council's authority, we talk about how they will be able to review architectural design orders. And we have this footnote there. DRC wanted the staff to place the same footnote over in this section where it talks about the architectural design order. So it says that architectural standards are not in effect for mixed-use development outside of the new downtown and redevelopment districts, multifamily development, and townhome development. Once standards are adopted, the standards shall become effective immediately. Our next step in the rewrite of the Land Development Code outside of the process amendments will be the architectural standards and landscaping. So we do not have architectural standards for those uses, but they are in the process of being developed. So we wanted to make sure that everyone knew, developers, staff, that we were all clear that there are no standards today, but once they are adopted, they will become effective immediately. The next change,
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, Ms.
Pollak?
Mayor. Before we get much further, I was just looking under the appeals section, and I was looking at the.
what page are you on?
I'm on page 11. I'm starting on page 11. And then I was kind of looking at the attachments, the last page on the attachments. It looks like the only thing the hearing officer has now under this proposed process is appeal of the land use administrator. Is that correct?
Yes, any appeals, also the land use administrator can refer applications to the hearing officer as well.
So I'm just kind of looking at this, and you were talking about the city budget as well and everything, and kind of taking some things away from the hearing officer because of that. Why don't we just eliminate the hearing officer position? And if the only thing they're doing is getting referrals by the land use administrator or hearing appeals of the land use administrator, why don't you just give that to the PZA like we had before?
And you can make that recommendation. That is a recommendation that this board can make.
I mean, originally I think the hearing officer was going to do a lot more, but if that's all they're going to do, why not just give that to the PZA? Or the LPA?
Madam Chair?
Who is that, Mr. Wright?
Now that we've kind of opened that question, land use administrator definition is city manager or appointed staff
Or it's
city
designated.
council. Who was the vision of having for the hearing officer? Was that an outside consultant? Was a city council? Was it who did we see filling that role?
It's an outside person,
What
and
is it
typically
called?
they are an attorney, yes.
Okay, is that separate from our city attorney at this
Yes.
point? So it's two independent, okay. Because I agree with you, I mean, again, it's about streamlining, it's also about costs. We've heard the word cost mentioned numerous times here, that's an outside cost for a small job task, and if it's an attorney-based, no offense to Mr. Group, it's not cheap.
Can I ask, is the hearing officer who would do this the same hearing officer who hears code enforcement cases?
It could be the same person. We have not quite made that decision yet. It could be. That's the only one, I believe that's the only one we have today, though. That's the only hearing officer that we have today.
So there aren't any other situations where there's a hearing officer involved in any decisions but code enforcement?
That's it today.
Madam Chair?
Okay. Mr. Wright?
Follow up, I mean, is the definition for the hearing officer, is it at a point where we have to have someone who can make a legal statement or a legal, as Mr. Group would come in and give us an opinion, does it have to be in a position that he has to give us a legal opinion?
Yeah, but they make findings of fact and conclusions of law, so yes.
Which at that point could potentially be outside of our realm of expertise?
Well, I won't say that because every time y'all approve a zoning, every time y'all approve anything that's quasi-judicial, you're making conclusions of law yourself.
I guess I'm just looking at what the potential is. I mean, if a project is denied by the land use administrator and it gets appealed to us and we back it up, or go against one or the other when we make a decision one way or another, and it becomes a legal issue at that point, where would it go from there? I mean, that's where you step in again, because now it's a suit against the board, against the land use administrator, against the city? Which can happen on any project you have, really.
Yeah. Some jurisdictions rely totally on hearing officers. Lee County, never use hearing officers. Some jurisdictions, like Seminole County, has used them on rare occasions when there was a messy situation, such as when adult entertainment was a big deal. They referred to hearing officers because they didn't want to hear it. They just wanted, as opposed to 8 hours of hearing, they could get a report from a hearing officer and have a 20-minute hearing on the 8-hour hearing that the hearing officer had. So jurisdictions are all over the place, and I don't think you would be upset with the recommendation to take hearing officers out of it. So.
And sorry to continue. And basically, even if, as Mr. Pollack had said, if we were acted as the role as the hearing officer, in that case, we still have the ability to ask for a legal opinion from our city attorney at that point. So we're not without at that point. So.
And Madam Chair.
Mr. Pollack.
And, furthermore, they can still appeal to the city council after, if we backed up the land use administrator, they can still go back to the city council. So, and then the city council, like you were saying before, the only appeal there is then they go to the courts. So there's still a backstop. City council still can have the final say on it.
Okay, so then the next change would be on page 50. And on page 50, this is for the outdoor sales event permit. The DRC wanted anyone who's getting an outdoor sales event permit to also have a peddler's permit prior to the approval of the outdoor sales event application. So we added language that says all applicants for an outdoor sales event permit shall provide proof of an approved peddler's permit prior to the issuance of an outdoor sales event permit.
Ms. Pierre, can I ask, what's a peddler's permit?
It's a permit that allows a person to go and sell commercial things in the city.
The solicitor's permit.
It's a peddler/solicitors.
Does that allow them to go door-to-door selling stuff?
The solicitors does. The peddler's permit is just for commercial activity.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification there.
You're welcome. Okay, and then the next change is on page 52. This is the performance guarantee, where they wanted to clarify that the improvements would be the minimum required, and that they wanted to also include street lighting and recreation equipment as part of a performance guarantee. And then the next change is in Article 6. The DRC wanted how we have the redevelopment site development order in Article 2.
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
I'm sorry, it's page 94. So we have the redevelopment site development order for the other parts of the city. The DRC wanted the same type of order in the downtown. So it's the same redevelopment site development order. We just deleted one of the criteria that says you cannot be adjacent to a single-family district, which all of downtown is going to be a mixed-use district. It is a mixed-use district. By the title, it's a mixed use. So we added redevelopment site development order in the downtown area for all the districts. And that was the end of the DRC's recommendation. This item will be considered by City Council. First reading is on August 3rd, and second reading is on August 17th. This concludes my presentation, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. I have a couple of things that I found in here I had questions about or typos. On page 32, about two-thirds of the way down the page, paragraph C, where it says the land use administrator may review the application. When you look down at the paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 underneath it, there's the word 30, but in the parentheses next to it, it's 20.
Yeah, in the packet that's provided before you, that has changed. It's
Okay.
changed to 20.
My next one is on page 39, section 3.4, development permits. It's just the first delineated paragraph underneath it didn't get carried over in formatting.
Page 39.
Yes.
And what's the begin? What section?
3.4A.
Oh, okay, I see it. Thank you.
And on page 67, section 4.6, Plan Unit Development District, the next to the last line that's underlined, toward the end of it where it says, and during which, looks like something's missing out of SOUD. There's a
Sound, should be sound.
sound.
Oh,
That's what I
sound.
thought.
Yes, it should be sound.
Those were all the typos that I had. Are there any questions of staff?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Young?
if you would, please kind of walk me through the process with the DRC recommendation and how it came to be where this board currently would provide recommendations for site development orders greater than 30%, but now, under the proposed process, it's a recommendation of DRC to remove any recommendation from this board.
Okay, so deviations greater than 30% requires a development agreement. The development agreement is reviewed by the city attorney and also by staff. Development agreements are actually pretty costly compared to just a regular deviation. So we have eliminated the need for a development agreement, which reduces the application costs. So we hear a lot that our application costs are one of the highest in Central Florida. I mean, we hear that all the time. And we're also trying to expedite the review of deviations greater than 30%. So when you eliminate the need for a development agreements are required to be considered by the staff, by the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board, and then by City Council, in addition to the city attorney. So when you eliminate the need for the development agreement, you eliminate the need for it to go before the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board, because that's the item that will take it to the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board. It's the development agreement. Without the development agreement, this board does not review site development orders for commercial, for projects, unless there's a development agreement associated with it. So we're eliminating that development agreement, which eliminates the need for it to go before Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board. So it'll go from staff to City Council. Except for building permits.
Except for building. Another way that's different, what Deborah says is right. Another way it was presented, as I recall too, is that oftentimes, some of y'all remember this, there used to be planning and zoning commissions and boards of adjustment, okay? And planning and zoning commissions did zoning and comp planning. And boards of adjustment did basically variances and maybe a few other things. The deviation, what we call a deviation, others would call a variance. So the city council is just saying, you guys don't need to fill the role of board of adjustment, focus on planning and zoning. That's what I recall, part of the conversation. Because they wanted you to have your role as full focus on planning and zoning.
Right.
And your statutory role as a local planning agency. That's the way I understood it.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there other questions of staff? Okay, this is a public hearing item. We'll open it up for public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak to the board on this item? Seeing none, we'll close public hearing. We've had several mentions of additions or corrections while we've been talking about this. So whoever makes a motion, please specify whether you're including those or not including them, if you're making a motion to approve. What's the board's pleasure?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Pollock?
I make a motion to approve these with the inclusion that I made on page 3 with the word fee, and then all the grammatical changes that you made, as well as removing reference to a hearing officer and replacing it with the LPA.
Is there a specific place where you're removing the hearing officer?
Throughout the whole document, the whole ordinance, removing all reference to a hearing
So
officer.
eliminating a hearing officer altogether?
Together.
Okay.
And replacing it with LPA.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Madam Chairman, does that also include all the changes the DRC made?
Yes, and the DRC.
Thank you.
Okay, and who made the second?
I did.
Mr. Wright? Thank you. Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? The only question I have is there's nobody that wants to change the terms from 2 back to 3 that DRC recommended? That's the one I thought everybody would jump on.
Well, I thought about it, and Madam Chair, sorry to interrupt. Because what it does is it basically, within a year or two, it basically means that over half, assuming the current 7-member board, over half of us are up for, reappointment, or in this case, if they do, would reduce it down to, the base minimum, then you would have 4/5 at one point. That would be potentially up, so there's I guess didn't really matter to me other than, I'm just wondering, maybe as a point of note, is that when we do have appointments or when we do have vacancies, what's our current application? Do we get 2? Do we get 1? Do we have to go out and solicit for appointments? I don't know how that process really works.
Are you asking as far as how much
Staff.
interest there is? And
Yeah,
how many applications are
the only thing I
received?
would see is if we have to have 4 positions potentially either vacated or appointed at one given time, that whether or not we would have enough. Again, sometimes we struggle to get quorum here, much less try to fill 4 positions all in 1 year. So that was the only downside I saw to it. So
I think the fact that we have struggled to get a quorum sometimes has something to do with them reducing it from 5 to 7. Now only 3 will be a quorum instead of 4.
Again, I mean, I kind of have issue with that because again, it's a separate topic, but as far as the size, but the terms, like I said, I just thought that, because eventually it bunches up, they still have to do appointments and reappointments every single year. You still have to advertise if there's a vacancy, regardless. It just means that they're doing more, they're opening it up to the point where if, for whatever reason, 4 people left the city, and then you'd have to get 4 appointments all at the same time, it may find it difficult.
Mr. Powell?
Chair. I mean, they're facing that right now, even under a 3-year term. I mean, if we all leave, we all serve at the pleasure of council. It doesn't, to me, the term, you either get reappointed or you don't. Whether it's 3 years or 2 years, to me, it just doesn't particularly matter on the term. It's just that we're just filling out our request for reappointment.
That means we're doing our Form 1s, all the same year. It doesn't
Yeah,
really matter. But,
we're still doing
doing them every year, so.
Yeah, that's not going to change. I
Yeah,
don't think
have an issue
anything
with
will
it. I just
change
thought it was
other
kind of
than,
interesting that they were lumping it all together. That's all.
Okay.
But to answer your second question, though, the down to 5, having a 3-person quorum make a final decision on a comp plan or on a land development issue, to me, seems, doesn't seem like enough people. Doesn't seem like there's enough bodies to do that, so.
what about a hearing officer?
Well,
Single
yeah,
person.
that's,
I don't know. And they can always, a 3-person quorum could always continue it if they felt like they needed more of the board present.
Well, I'm sorry, the only item that I think we're a final authority on are the building permits, deviations from the building permits. Everything else, we're just a recommending body. Is there any other discussion? Okay. We'll call the vote then on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the list is discussion. Good night, Lenny. Thank you for coming.
Night, Lonnie.
Next item on the list, discussion items, Form 1s. Did everybody fill theirs out and turn them in?
I actually did this year, for the first time.
On
ever.
time, huh?
It's
Me as well.
never been late, I've never been fined.
Really?
Yes, really, Madam Surprise.
Yes. I am surprised.
I don't remember turning mine in.
This is the first year
That's
I
me
didn't
every
turn
year.
mine in on time. I still haven't filled it out yet.
But you've got until
I'll get
September
that.
1st.
Yes.
I know that date very well.
You've heard about that date, huh?
Once or twice, or
Well, you could either
9
s-
times.
You can either send them to Supervisor of Elections or turn them into
Barbara.
City Clerk here. Okay, next item are future meeting dates. July 28th, August 11th shows it's canceled, and then August 25th. Can you tell us about the August 11th? There are just no items for that?
There are no items right now.
Okay.
It was canceled because there is a conflict in the calendar. So if we have items, we'll.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have anything else we need to discuss? Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Got just about all the seconds on there. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned.
I'm good.